Or in other words, just to say it, just because people are biased, and scientists are people, and engineers are people, that doesn't mean it's a good thing to deliberately politicize everything and focus on a particular agenda. When I saw this particular headline come across, I had a similar thought to other things, other similar kinds of headlines of no, surely it cannot be. It cannot be what somebody has put into a paper. Cannot be that. There will certainly be something else, and the headline is wrong. Because as if you've followed this channel, you might remember a side chat Saturday with Kieran White, journalist and host of Crowdsource podcast and founder of Wokescreen, that you might remember us doing a bit discussing the interactions between science and media, and how it is often the case that most journalists who are reading scientific papers know precisely nothing about the material, and so often just get the headlines completely wrong, and in cases the headline says something completely to the opposite of what the paper says, which does happen. So hence the reason you should actually pay attention when someone says study says this. If the study is not cited in the article, that's a whole other thing. But if it is, go read the paper, because you might find they have a different conclusion than one the journalist came to. But this, unfortunately, is not one of those times. This coming from the College Fix. It is one of those times where you do have the headline being somewhat close to what was actually said in the study, in quotes. I'm going to say with that, because I do not necessarily think it was a study as much as a crap ton of assumptions made, and very postmodernist in development, but we'll get to that soon enough. From the College Fix, scholars call for social justice in civil engineering courses. Civil engineering students need to engage with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice so they can understand the differential impacts of engineering on individuals from different groups within society. Civil engineering courses should not just focus on how to construct sewers, build roads, or design bridges. They should also include social justice and diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, according to a recent academic paper. So I am not going to go further with that here, because, of course, as is always the case for me, I like to go actually find the paper. And, of course, this will also be linked in the description of the video for you. But before we begin, I did want to bring up one thing in that, as with many things, of course, there's a question of ethics going on here. What is the ethics of engineers? And this actually comes from the National Society of Professional Engineers, in which they have some very, very important codes of ethics for engineers generally. And of course, this does apply to civil engineering. Engineering is an important and learned profession. As members of this profession, engineers are expected to exhibit the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Engineering has a direct and vital impact on the quality of life for people. Full stop there, if you notice. Accordingly, the services provided by engineers require honesty, impartiality, fairness, and equity. And we'll say here with the equity side of things, because I have read this all the way through, they don't mean it in the postmodern sense, actually. They mean it in the more classical liberal Enlightenment sense, and must be dedicated to the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. Engineers must perform under the standard professional behavior that requires adherence to the highest principles of ethical conduct. The fundamental canons of which, and I want to point this out specifically here in this top one, hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. And with regard to that particular one here, because they have rules of practice for this, if engineers' judgment is overruled under circumstances that endanger life or property, they shall notify their employer or client and such other authority as may be appropriate. With this one. So I'll get into that in a minute in terms of why this article has a whole bunch of things going on with it that need to be addressed. But and with regards to specifically some degrees of commentary, which really shouldn't be teaching engineers that. But this is the article in PDF format itself, bringing social justice context into civil engineering courses for first year and third year students. Now, as per normal with these, I never check on anything associated with the authors. I barely just like glance at the authors' names. I have no idea who they are. Those kinds of things. I, of course, show the authors' names here because for you all to find the article, sometimes it's easier because a lot of things are, of course, cited by like first author in all of these different things. But I never look at the authors' names. I will tell you also, because I looked at it ahead of time with this, they do also have positionality statements in here, which, of course, is a left of center and postmodernist way of thinking about it. Thinking about things is very often there in the case with that. So you already know which direction this article is coming from that. I never read those either. And the reason I never read those is their background, demographic characteristics, none of that is important. None of that is important because they are engaging in a scientific exercise here. And so for me to say it mattered when it doesn't would be a violation of universalism in here, which is one of the normative principles of science. Mertonian norms of science does still kind of matter in this. So with that in mind, there'll be a few things that I don't read for that reason, because the background and the names of the authors here do not matter. The ideas in the paper do, but the names and backgrounds and demographic characteristics and all those things of positionality, which is basically things that we didn't need to know about you to begin with when you wrote the article, is actually irrelevant and will not be read here. But I will also not be going through the full article just because I don't have time today to do that in this particular full recording. But again, like I said, linked in the description, and this one happens to be an open access article, so go enjoy it. Sarcastically intended, perhaps, for most of you. Oh, goodness. Here we go. Civil engineering must be updated to keep pace with the profession and move past a culture of disengagement where technical work is considered separate from societal impact. I'm going to get into that more in a second because I very much disagree with with this particular construct here. I've seen this with science and STEM disciplines in general as an argument from postmodernist thought, and I do think it's quite a misread, but we'll get into that in a moment. Civil engineering students need to engage with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice so they can understand the differential impacts of engineering on individuals from different groups within society. Assumption made there that engineering does have differential impacts on different groups within society. Assumption. No proof ever given, because I remember that in the rest of the article, there was no proof ever given of that statement. We aim to encourage the transformation of civil engineering education to produce engineers who will be prepared to meaningfully engage with society and advance justice in their future professional roles by providing examples of pedagogical change and analyzing student responses. Now, point to take on this one before I go any further with that. What is the purpose of an engineer? Talk about the telos of telos of science in general being about the pursuit of the truth in here. Well, what are civil engineers tasked with? The building of infrastructure, not to the advancement of justice. Basically giving civil engineers a whole bunch of things that is not their job to do. And also because this article comes from a very left of center worldview in here, and a very postmodern worldview in reading it. From probably a very particularly desired focus on advancing a particular kind of justice that comes from their particular worldview is what I get out of that, based on reading the article in the ideas here. So in this study, we implemented new course assignments in an introductory civil engineering course and a civil engineering materials course. In the introductory assignment, students were taught to draw systems models and asked to consider social and technical factors contributing to the Hurricane Katrina disaster. In the materials course, students completed pre-class readings about a regional highway construction project, including articles about neighborhood opposition to the project, and participated in an in-class discussion. We analyzed student submissions using qualitative content analysis. Students in both courses, 33% introductory, 60% materials, described learning about the impact engineering designs had on the community. In the materials class, students were asked specifically about the impact of race and wealth on infrastructure decision-making. Student responses showed a wide range in how students understood the history of the situation and dynamics of power and privilege. Nothing about the actual purpose of engineering. You notice here with postmodernist stuff, it is always about power. Errors and limitations in student responses point to specific ways the the instructors can improve student learning. Our results demonstrate that the integration of activities about societal impact is possible, and technical engineering courses emphasize the importance of integrating social context and related DEIJ content into technical courses and provide insights into what students perceived as they learn from the activities. Okay. There's a few things here that I want to go into with this, and as a point to make here, starting with this particular section on societal context and social justice in civil engineering, they make the claim here right at the start. The ethical imperative of engineers is to improve the quality of life for all. The ethical imperative of engineers to improve the quality of life for all is a call to social justice, a call that can also be thought of as creating fairness within society. Defining what is fair is a normative question that will have different answers from different people in different contexts. This is part of why a more narrow definition of social justice can be hard to specify. It's also why it's easily manipulated to mean whatever the heck folks want it to mean who push it, which is not necessarily good. Well, frankly, is not good at all. It's a way to manipulate people, which is ethically questionable to begin with. The ethical imperative of engineers to improve the quality of life. Go back in here. Engineering has a direct and vital impact on the quality of life for all people, and it does. It does. I'm talking about roads. You're talking about bridges, and civil engineering specifically. You're talking about roads, bridges, dams, sewers, stormwater infrastructure, all those kinds of things. So yeah, no, they does have a very vital impact on the quality of life here. But is that really a call to social justice? No. It can be for some people. I'm sure it can be. But to make the assumption that it is, which is the statement made there, is an assumption because it is a statement of fact, though most definitely I think represents the opinions of the authors more so than the than any factual basis for that. According to the Ethics of Engineers from the Professional Society of Engineers, if you will, they do have ethical imperatives to protect the health and safety and welfare of the public. But if you're following a social justice paradigm with this, will that social justice paradigm always be to the benefit, or rather, will that social justice paradigm always be protective of the health, safety, and welfare of the public? Now, for that, I go back to Thomas Sowell's most recent book, Social Justice Fallacies, where he actually lays it out quite very well in depth in one of the chapters. I forget which chapter exactly, but he goes into very much depth in how making decisions from a social justice paradigm actually had some pretty negative impacts for the health and welfare and safety of the people they were claiming to help. So no, social justice does not necessarily align with the notions of improving the quality of life. At times, it does very much degrade the quality of life, particularly for all the same people it is presumed to help. And that unfortunately got ignored in this particular article. So it is an assumption that, yeah, to improve the quality of life, you should have social justice because that'll make things better and fairer and what have you. Again, define what is fair, which they get here, which good on you for recognizing that fair is a very subjective notion here. Oftentimes in the with postmodernists bringing up the disparity fallacy, i.e. the thinking that every disparate impact is the result of systemic discrimination, which is not necessarily true because however many hundreds of thousands of things and authors from Bernard Hommel to Thomas Sowell have all talked about this, that there are thousands of factors that could actually affect a person's life and outcome in life. So Not to mention the other thing about equal outcomes that's interesting. What if the equal outcomes between two people are not necessarily the best outcomes for those two people? You know, if you have an equal outcome between two individuals, which is what you deal with equity, primarily is, you what if having two people have the same outcomes means that both of them don't have what is the best outcome for them, and something that leaves them very unsatisfied because of it? That's a thought here. Let's see. Further, social justice is not so much a thing to be achieved as it is a continuing process and an ongoing struggle. So, in other words, there is no measure of success, and that is very much also in the postmodernist thought. It's very also much considered very left. Again, why people don't like this stuff. Now, here's the fun part that gives me a kick. We need to engage civil engineering students with questions of justice throughout their schooling, so they're prepared to engage with these topics as professionals. We need to teach using only problems with, excuse me, when we teach using only problems with right answers, as is common, we give the impression that right and wrong, just and unjust can be expressed in a simple decision. We neglect the fact that many questions have no right answers and ignore the way that a series of instrumentally ethical decisions can lead to unjust outcomes. We also ignore the ongoing nature of social justice work. We must shift our framing to teach societal impacts of civil engineering work and how the work of civil engineering can advance justice or thwart it. Again, what is the purpose of civil engineering? Nothing about societal justice, to my knowledge, in the purpose of civil engineering. Just saying. So no, it doesn't belong there in the slightest, I don't think. But the more to the point here, this particular section in the middle. When we teach using only problems with right answers, as is common, we give the impression that right and wrong, just and unjust, can be expressed in a simple decision. You're talking with civil engineering about what? Bridges, dams, sewers, stormwater, flood control infrastructure. Because I think a number of these might actually end up going to the Army Corps of Engineers. And if you have folks who are part of the Army Corps of Engineers, well, here's one thing you can say with that one. With the Army Corps of Engineers, they do a lot of flood control related infrastructure along the Mississippi River, for example, things like that. There's lots of physics involved. There's lots of understanding of the strain of materials, what things can take. What happens then if you are teaching that a right answer doesn't matter in this situation? There are situations, plenty of them, where getting a right answer matters. And if you don't get the right answer, it's tremendously detrimental to life and property. And indeed, if a dam is constructed and you don't get the right answer on the physics when you're doing the calculations with that, does that not increase the likelihood that that dam will break and perhaps cause a tremendous amount of damage to property and a tremendous amount of loss of life? That is a situation where getting the right answer matters. And that is a situation where if you're so focused on the process, and the process matters more, that there is no right and wrong answer in this. And yeah, right and wrong can actually be expressed in simple decisions. It can end very badly sometimes if you get the wrong answer, particularly when you're talking about physics involved in this. There is a lot of physics involved in working with engineering. And that is where I come back to this particular notion. If an engineer's judgment is overruled under circumstances that endanger life or property, they shall notify their employer or client and such other authority as may be appropriate. If the social justice context and all of those kinds of things become so much more important than the right answer with respect to the physics in the construction of a dam, a sewer, stormwater infrastructure, flood control infrastructure, all those kinds of things. And that becomes more important to the point where you go with a particular engineer's design and the other engineer is overruled who actually did try to get the right answer with respect to actually making sure that dam's not going to break, then is it not a violation of engineering ethics? That is the question. Is that not a violation of the ethics of engineers when you're talking about protecting life and property to go into a situation where you're saying nope, 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 nope. Now, I will say, caveat this, will say that yeah, there are some decisions where there's not an easy answer to anything. And there's not necessarily the most clear thing of which way to go. What is the right and wrong, if you will. But engineering decisions with physics involved, where the wrong answer could lead to serious loss of life, is not one of those decisions. I want engineers who can get the right answers on their physics problems. And so I'm not saying that that's, when we teach using only problems. Sorry, that's actually what I want to see is more of those where you're actually helping students learn the engineering principles so they can get the designs right and functional so things don't break and cause lots of problems later down the road, or don't break easily anyway, because things do eventually break down. But that is actually much more important to me in this situation. I think a lot more important to a lot of the general public to have engineers who can actually design things that aren't going to fall apart while they're living next to them or driving over them. And hence the reason why I go back to the point, and I have yet to see I didn't see the authors ever answer this when I read this. What the heck is the purpose of civil engineering? It is not to advance justice. It is the construction of infrastructure. Design and construction of infrastructure for the good of society in that way, for the benefit of society. And if you're going to make decisions, even though they are perhaps focused in social justice, then congratulations. You may have very well made a decision that actually does harm. So no, not necessarily does social justice have to be involved at all with engineering. Now, I do want to get to one other thing. Oh, the other thing that this points to with this whole mess here is moral relativism that they put in here. And I find it funny because actually they come down here later and mention Rotman and Reeve struggled with backlash from students in their ethics intervention in a workshop with primarily upper-level students. To avoid backlash problems, Rotman and Reeve recommended including critical analyses to avoid moral relativism and to focus on building and implementing respectful dialogue skills. Now, I don't actually disagree with the notion of building respectful dialogue skills. That does need to happen. But on the one hand, you're saying, yeah, we're going to have moral relativism right here, but we got to avoid it when we're actually teaching. A little bit of a contradiction. Where is, yes, here's the other section I wanted to point out. Let me highlight this real quick, just so I remember, just so I have it easily viewable. This is out of their theoretical framework. Engineering in the United States largely, although implicitly is implicitly framed within a culture of disengagement. Their name for it, by the way. The culture of disengagement has three underlying ideological pillars: depoliticization, technical social dualism, and meritocracy. Depoliticization is the belief that engineering is unbiased and therefore can and should be removed from social and political contexts as these may bias an otherwise pure field and practice. The term depoliticization refers to the removal of the entire social context from engineering, not simply avoiding more narrowly tailored political factors. That's not accurate. That is not accurate, by the way. The technical social dualism creates a false dichotomy between technical and social factors and devalues social values and competencies in favor of technical skills and knowledge. In addition, meritocracy upholds social structures as both fair and upholds current social structures as both fair and just. No actual treatment here, by the way, of what meritocracy is, and what those kinds of things. And then that I will refer you back to an old favorite article. You all may remember this, In Defense of Merit in Science, which actually has some half decent stuff in it compared to, well, I would say more than half decent, but they actually approach this particular question with respect to the politicization thing here. And I think I wanted to come back to this because because the notion that we're talking about completely removing social context here, that is not what anyone means by depoliticization who actually defends that sort of approach of not having political things influence science and engineering and math and technology. Let me give you a lesson here. From the In Defense of Merit article, the universalism of science does not preclude culture or politics from being involved in funding priorities. Funders, whether government or private, are expected to receive a return on their investment. Yet, politicians should not dictate how science is done, and political agendas should not replace Mertonian norms. History demonstrates the dangers of replacing merit-based science with ideological control and social engineering. In the Soviet Union, the aberrations of Trofim Lysenko had catastrophic consequences for science and society. An agronomist and people's scientist who came from the superior class of poor peasants, Lysenko rejected Mendelian genetics because of its supposed inconsistency with Marxist ideology. Dissent from Lysenko's ideas was outlawed, and his opponents were fired or prosecuted. Lysenko's ideologically infused agricultural ideas were put into practice in the USSR and China, where in both countries they led to decreased crop yields and famine. Today, biology is again being subjected to ideology. Medical schools deny the basis of biological basis of sex. Biology courses avoid teaching all the heritable traits, and so on. More examples of ideological subversion of science relevant to physics and chemistry were discussed in a recent viewpoint. Now, why do I read this in the context of the other article over here where they're saying this whole thing about depoliticization is just removing the social context? No, it's not. It's basically saying that the social context, the political things going on, should not be what drives science. Should not be. The agenda should not replace the norms. In other words, social justice should not replace the normative principles of science. That is actually the argument. That is not to say that things should be separated, because you just can't. You can't perfectly separate it. No one I know who argues for this worldview, for this approach to it, where you don't have political agendas driving science, technology, engineering, and medicine, and mathematics, by the way, none of them argue that you should just keep them totally separate. That's not what is argued at all. Rather, acknowledging and knowing the social context and the political things going on, yes, but neither of those agendas should be what drives the actual scientific research, the engineering practice, or anything like that. And actually, one of those engineering ethics in that ethics document I mentioned was actually about being objective and truthful as much as you possibly can. Now, Jonathan Rauch goes into this more in the Constitution of Knowledge, where he actually talks about why the community is structured the way it's structured, in the fact that folks do have their biases, yes, but we counterbalance each other in these kinds of things. Now, such analysis, reading from the Defense of Merit paper again, just to make the point about the other thing here, such analysis is often dismissed with vague deflections such as everything is political and everyone is biased. There is an element of truth in these declarations which can help raise awareness of the potential of sciences to have biases, including biases on politicized topics, and help minimize such biases. However, those making these arguments often use them to impose their own ideological agendas on what can be studied and what kinds of answers are permissible. In this sense of the politicization, it is this sense of the politicization of science that we categorically oppose. Or in other words, just to say it, just because people are biased, and scientists are people, and engineers are people, that doesn't mean it's a good thing to deliberately politicize everything and focus on a particular agenda. And that is unfortunately what this article is arguing for, is having specific agendas be the focus of engineering and specific ways of thinking about social issues rather than teaching about engineering and allowing folks to learn and come to their own conclusions about whether such social justice is the appropriate way to go about addressing certain societal issues, either in engineering or just in general. And that's the point I want to make with this, is that there is actually a lot of moral relativism that goes on with with this article. There's more here, and I encourage you to go read it. It was also interesting to see some of the students' responses, including students pointing out their frustration with the assumptions made, some of which I've already stated here, so I will not go back into it any further, but I encourage you to go take a look at it. I'm going to cut things off here because this video is getting a little bit long, but I encourage you to go read it, and there's a whole bunch of things there and contradictions of moral relativism and what have you. But frankly, just to finish it up with that, I would be less inclined to trust an engineer who was more interested in advancing justice than building a dam that actually works. Just saying. Doesn't mean they can't have, I will preface this, does not mean folks can't have their own interests and their ideological interests and what have you like that. That is not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, if you're letting your proclivities for activism override your role as an engineer, then that's a problem. That is actually kind of a problem, and I do worry about whether or not you got the right answer when you were trying to design that dam, or that bridge, or that flood control infrastructure, or anything along that line. Anyway, let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.